In an old dorm, kitchen, flour, laughter, and unspoken feelings blur the line between friendship and something warmer. "Don't move," Jimin said sharply, grabbing Jungkook's wrist just as the pan slipped from his hand and crashed against the old dormitory floor. For a moment, the sound echoed through the quiet apartment like a gunshot. Jungkook froze, eyes wide, the spatula still hovering awkwardly in midair. The faint smell of burnt butter curled upward from the stove, mixing with the powdery scent of flour scattered across the counter. Outside the cracked kitchen window, Seoul's winter wind rattled the loose frame like impatient fingers tapping on glass. Jimin exhaled slowly. "You were about to start a fire," he said, though his voice softened almost immediately. Jungkook laughed under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hyung, it was just butter." "Burning butter," Jimin corrected. The kitchen of the old dormitory looked exactly the same as it had years ago, small, cluttered, stubbornly unchanged. The cabinets were still slightly crooked. The fluorescent light above the sink still flickered every few seconds like it was unsure whether to stay alive. This place had once been filled with noise, footsteps, arguments about food, late-night laughter echoing through thin walls. Now it was quiet. Too quiet. Jimin bent down and picked up the fallen pan, inspecting it before placing it back on the stove. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Cooking had always been like that for him, something controlled, predictable, safe. "Unlike people." "Okay," Jimin said, tying the apron tighter around Jungkook's waist. "Step 1, you listen." Jungkook saluted dramatically. "Yes, chef." "Step 2, Jimin continued, ignoring the salute. "You stop pretending you know what you're doing." Jungkook grinned. "That's my whole personality, though." Jimin tried not to smile. He turned toward the counter and pushed a bowl toward Jungkook. Flour puffed lightly into the air as it moved, drifting down like pale dust. "Today," Jimin said, "I'm teaching you how to cook something that won't poison anyone." Jungkook leaned forward, peering into the bowl. "Pancakes." "Yes." "That's insulting. You burned instant ramen last time." "That pot was defective." Jimin shook his head. There was something strangely familiar about this moment. Jungkook standing there with messy hair, sleeves rolled up, eyes bright with curiosity. It reminded Jimin of a much younger version of him, the kid who used to follow everyone around asking questions. Back then, Jungkook had been all restless energy and shy smiles. Now he filled the kitchen like a storm that didn't know where to land. "Mix it," Jimin said. Jungkook grabbed the whisk and began stirring with unnecessary enthusiasm. Flour immediately leapt out of the bowl and onto the counter. "Gently," Jimin sighed. "I am being gentle." "That's not gentle, that's violence." Jungkook laughed again, the sound bouncing off the narrow kitchen walls. For a second, it felt like the old days, the dorm alive again with noise. Jimin leaned against the counter, watching him. He noticed small things. The way Jungkook's tongue peeked out slightly when he focused, the quiet humming under his breath, the faint scar on his knuckle from years ago when he had punched a practice room wall during a frustrating rehearsal. Jimin remembered that night. He had wrapped Jungkook's hand in ice and told him not to be stupid. Jungkook had only smiled and said, "Too late." "Hyung," Jungkook said suddenly, interrupting Jimin's thoughts. "What? Why did you keep this place?" Jimin paused. The whisk scraped against the bowl in uneven circles. "I didn't keep it," Jimin said. "It was just still here." That wasn't entirely true. When everyone moved out years ago, Jimin had visited the old dorm once out of curiosity, then again and again. Eventually, he stopped asking himself why. The kitchen light flickered again. Jungkook poured milk into the batter, splashing a little onto the counter. Jimin reached over instinctively to wipe it with a cloth. Their hands brushed. Just briefly. But Jungkook noticed. He always noticed small things. You still come here sometimes, don't you? Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin didn't answer right away. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sliding across the wall like a moving memory. Sometimes, he admitted. Jungkook nodded slowly. I get it, he said. Do you? Yeah. The whisk slowed. It's weird going back to places that remember who you used to be. Jimin looked at him then. There was something thoughtful in Jungkook's expression, something deeper than the usual playful energy. For a moment, Jimin saw the boy and the man layered together like overlapping reflections. Okay, Jimin said, clearing his throat. Enough philosophy, heat the pan. Jungkook obeyed. The butter melted properly this time, spreading across the pan with a soft hiss. Jimin guided Jungkook's hand as he poured the batter. Not too much. This looks perfect. That's too much. It's a big pancake. It's a disaster. The batter spread unevenly but held together. They both leaned closer to watch it cook. Tiny bubbles formed on the surface. Jungkook smiled. Hey, he said, it's working. Don't celebrate yet. Jungkook glanced sideways at Jimin. You're very negative for a cooking teacher. I'm realistic. A comfortable silence settled between them. The pancake browned slowly. The kitchen smelled warm now, butter, flour, and something nostalgic Jimin couldn't quite name. Jungkook flipped the pancake. It landed slightly crooked, but intact. Yes, Jungkook said triumphantly. He raised both hands in victory, forgetting the flour still clinging to his fingers. Before Jimin could react, Jungkook reached out and lightly brushed his cheek. White powder streaked across Jimin's face. They both froze. Jungkook blinked. Those. Jimin stared at him. You did not just. Jungkook burst into laughter. I didn't mean to. You absolutely did. Jimin grabbed the flour bag. Jungkook stepped back immediately. Hyung, wait. Too late. A small cloud of flour puffed across Jungkook's black shirt. The kitchen erupted into chaotic laughter. Jungkook leaned against the counter, gasping for breath. Jimin tried to maintain dignity, but failed. Flour coated the counter, the stove, their sleeves. The pancake burned quietly behind them. Eventually, the laughter faded. Jungkook wiped his eyes. You look ridiculous, he said softly. So do you. Another silence followed. But this one felt different. Closer. Jungkook reached out again, slower this time. His thumb brushed Jimin's cheek gently, wiping away the flour streak. The motion was careful, almost absent-minded. But it lingered. Jimin felt the warmth of Jungkook's hand before he realized neither of them was speaking anymore. The room had gone completely still. The fluorescent light hummed faintly above them. Jungkook's laughter faded into something quieter. Their eyes met. In that tiny kitchen, surrounded by flour and burnt pancakes, the moment stretched longer than it should have. Neither of them moved. And for the first time that night, Jimin realized how warm the kitchen felt. You're staring, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin blinked, realizing he had been frozen for several seconds, Jungkook's thumb still lingering near his cheek, where the flour had been wiped away. I'm not, Jimin replied, though his voice came out tighter than he intended. Jungkook tilted his head slightly, studying him with the same curiosity he used when learning choreography, like he was trying to decode something hidden beneath the surface. You definitely are. Jimin turned away first. The pancake behind them had turned completely black. Smoke curled upward in slow, accusing spirals. Oh, Jungkook rushed to the stove and grabbed the spatula. Hyung, the pancake. Congratulations, Jimin muttered, opening the window. You've successfully invented charcoal pancakes. Cold air rushed into the kitchen, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of winter rain. Jungkook scraped the ruined pancake into the trash and laughed again, but softer this time. You distracted me. I distracted you, Jimin turned back, eyebrows raised. Jungkook leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a playful spark returning to his eyes. Well, he said slowly, you were looking at me like you never seen me before. Jimin grabbed another bowl. You're imagining things. I'm not. You are. Jungkook watched him start measuring flour again, his movements sharper now. You get like this sometimes, Jungkook said. Like what? Quiet. Jimin scooped sugar into the bowl with unnecessary precision. I'm always quiet. No, Jungkook said gently, not like this. The kitchen filled with the soft sound of the whisk again. Jimin refused to look at him. Jungkook walked around the counter and leaned against the opposite side, close enough that Jimin could hear the faint rhythm of his breathing. You're thinking about something, Jungkook said. And you're overanalyzing everything, Jimin replied. Jungkook smiled faintly. Hyung. What? You only call me kid when you're relaxed. Jimin paused. And right now, Jungkook continued, you're not calling me anything. Jimin set the whisk down. You came here to learn how to cook, he said, not to psychoanalyze me. Maybe I came for both. Jimin finally looked up. Their eyes locked again. Something heavy settled between them, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. Jungkook broke the tension first. So, he said, clapping his hands together lightly, round two, let's not burn this one. Jimin nodded and turned back to the stove. They moved around each other in the small kitchen like they had done 1,000 times before, unconsciously synchronized. Jungkook poured milk while Jimin mixed the batter. Jimin heated the pan while Jungkook reached for butter. Their shoulders brushed again. This time neither of them reacted immediately. Careful, Jimin murmured. You're the one in my way. I was here first. You always say that. Jimin snorted softly. Jungkook poured the batter carefully this time, concentrating harder than before. The pancake spread perfectly across the pan. They both leaned closer. See, Jungkook whispered, progress. Jimin nodded approvingly. Not terrible. That's the highest praise I've ever received from you. The pancake cooked slowly. The kitchen grew warmer. Jungkook glanced around the dorm again, his gaze drifting toward the hallway. You know, he said, this place feels smaller. It always was small. No, Jungkook said, shaking his head. It felt bigger before. That's because there were 7 people crammed into it. Jungkook laughed. Remember when Taehyung tried to microwave ice cream? Jimin groaned. Don't remind me. It exploded. It melted. It exploded emotionally. Jimin smiled despite himself. Jungkook's voice softened. We were loud back then. Too loud. But happy. Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook flipped the pancake. Perfect golden brown. Hyung, Jungkook said proudly, look. Jimin examined it. Acceptable. That means amazing. That means acceptable. Jungkook placed the pancake on a plate and leaned back against the counter again. The playful mood slowly faded. The quiet returned. Jungkook watched Jimin rinse the whisk in the sink. You changed, Jungkook said suddenly. Jimin froze slightly. People change. Yeah, Jungkook said, but you changed more. Jimin turned off the faucet. What does that mean? You used to laugh more. Jimin dried his hands slowly. And you used to be shorter. I'm serious. So am I. Jungkook walked closer. Why did you stop coming around? Jimin looked confused. I didn't. You did. Jungkook's voice carried a strange tension now. After the last tour, he continued, everyone kept meeting up. Dinner, practice rooms, late-night studio stuff. Jimin leaned back against the counter. You were busy too. Not too busy for you. Jimin looked away. Jungkook noticed immediately. The air shifted. You avoided me, Jungkook said quietly. I didn't. You did. Jimin crossed his arms. You're imagining things again. Jungkook stepped closer. The small kitchen suddenly felt even smaller. You stopped answering my messages sometimes, Jungkook said. I answered most of them. Not the important ones. Jimin frowned. What important ones? Jungkook hesitated. For a moment, his confidence cracked. Then he laughed awkwardly and ran a hand through his hair. Forget it. No, Jimin said slowly, say it. Jungkook shook his head. It doesn't matter. Jungkook. The way Jimin said his name made Jungkook look up. Jimin rarely used it like that. Soft, serious. Jungkook swallowed. I asked you to come see me, he said. You ask that all the time. That time was different. Jimin searched his face. How? Jungkook hesitated again. The fluorescent light flickered above them. Finally, he said quietly, because I meant it. Jimin's chest tightened unexpectedly. I thought you were joking, he admitted. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. You thought I was joking. You joke about everything. Not that. Jimin felt something twist uncomfortably in his stomach. You never said it seriously, he said. I did. When? Jungkook laughed softly, but there was frustration in it. Hyung, I literally said, can you come over tonight? I want to talk. That could mean anything. It meant I wanted to talk. You talk all the time. Jungkook stepped even closer now, frustration bubbling under the surface. Not about real things. What real things? Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. Something intense flashed in his eyes. Forget it, he said again. He turned toward the door. But Jimin grabbed his wrist. The sudden contact stopped him. Jungkook. Jungkook slowly turned back. Jimin rarely held onto people like this. What did you want to say? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You really want to know? Yes. Another long silence filled the kitchen. Jungkook looked down at Jimin's hand, still holding his wrist. Then back up. You're going to pretend you don't understand, he said. I might. Exactly. Jimin released his wrist slowly. Then explain it. Jungkook exhaled sharply, running both hands through his hair again. You drive me crazy sometimes, you know that. I've been told. You notice everything except the obvious. What obvious thing? Jungkook stepped closer again. Now they were only a few inches apart. You really don't see it? Jungkook asked. Jimin's heartbeat suddenly felt louder than the humming light. See what? Jungkook laughed under his breath. Unbelievable. Jimin's voice dropped slightly. Jungkook. The way he said it made Jungkook pause. There was something vulnerable in Jimin's expression now, something rare. Jungkook studied his face carefully. Then something inside him softened. You really didn't know, he murmured. No what? Jungkook looked down briefly, then back up again. You were the one I wanted to talk to, he said quietly. You always talk to me. No, Jungkook said, shaking his head. Not like that. The tension between them thickened. Outside, the wind rattled the window again. Jimin felt a strange warmth rising in his chest. Then how, he asked. Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. The kind of smile that carried both affection and frustration. Young, he said softly. You're really brave on stage. What does that have to do with anything? But off stage, Jungkook continued, you're terrible at facing feelings. Jimin blinked. That's not. It is. Jungkook stepped back slightly, giving them both breathing room. The distance suddenly felt noticeable. I asked you to come that night, Jungkook said, because I thought if I said it directly, maybe you'd finally hear it. Jimin's voice came out quieter now. Say what? Jungkook looked at him again. This time, his gaze was steady. I missed you, he said simply. Jimin felt something inside him shift. Jungkook shrugged lightly. But you never came. Jimin didn't realize he had been holding his breath until that moment. Slowly, he leaned back against the counter again. I thought, he began. What? I thought you didn't need me like that anymore. Jungkook frowned. What does that mean? You have your own life now, Jimin said. New people, new routines. Jungkook stared at him for several seconds. Then he laughed, short, incredulous. Young. What? You're unbelievable. Why? Jungkook walked toward him again, slower this time. Because you think you're easy to replace. Jimin didn't know what to say to that. Jungkook stopped right in front of him. Close again. Too close for the small kitchen. You're not, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin felt the warmth of his words more than he expected. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Jungkook glanced at the plate on the counter. The pancake getting cold. Jimin followed his gaze. Eat it then. You first. No, you. Jungkook tore the pancake in half and handed a piece to Jimin. Their fingers brushed again. Neither of them pulled away immediately. They stood there in the dim dorm kitchen, eating slightly overcooked pancakes in silence. The air still carried flour dust and burnt butter. But something between them had shifted. Something neither of them fully understood yet. And for the first time that night, the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. You still do that, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin looked up from the plate, half of the pancakes still in his hand. Do what? Pretend things are simple when they're not. The words hung in the kitchen like steam from the pan. Jimin chewed slowly, buying himself a few seconds. The pancake tasted fine, slightly crisp on the edges, soft inside, but suddenly it felt difficult to swallow. You're overthinking again, Jimin said. Jungkook leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, watching him carefully. You always say that. Because you always do. Jungkook tilted his head slightly, the faintest smile forming, but it didn't reach his eyes. Young, he said, voice lower now, you know what your biggest talent is. Jimin sighed, please don't say dancing. No, Jungkook replied, avoidance. Jimin almost laughed, but the seriousness in Jungkook's expression stopped him. That's not fair. It is. Jungkook pushed himself off the counter and walked slowly across the kitchen, stopping near the window Jimin had opened earlier. Cold air brushed through the room, carrying a faint scent of rain and asphalt. You avoid questions, Jungkook continued. You avoid conversations, and when things get real, he glanced back at Jimin, you disappear. Jimin frowned slightly. I didn't disappear. You did. Jungkook. You stopped calling me. I was busy. You stopped visiting. We all stopped visiting. That's not true. Jimin's patience thinned slightly. Why does this matter so much to you? Jungkook laughed under his breath, but it sounded more like disbelief than humor. That's exactly what I mean. What? You ask that like it's a normal question. Jimin set the plate down. Then answer it. Jungkook turned fully toward him now, leaning his shoulder against the wall. You really don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't ask. For a moment, Jungkook just stared at him. There was a flicker of something complicated in his eyes, frustration mixed with something softer. Okay, Jungkook said finally, let me try something else. Jimin waited. Back then, Jungkook continued slowly, when we all lived here, who did I spend the most time with? Jimin shrugged, everyone. No. Probably Taehyung. Jungkook shook his head. You. Jimin blinked. That's not surprising, he said. We practiced together a lot. That's not what I meant. Jimin's expression tightened slightly. Jungkook pushed himself off the wall and walked closer again. I followed you everywhere, he said. You followed everyone. No, Jungkook said firmly, mostly you. Jimin felt an uncomfortable warmth creep up his neck. That's because I was the responsible one, he said. Jungkook smiled faintly. You were the one I trusted. Jimin looked away again. You trusted everyone. Jungkook sighed. You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. What? You keep shrinking everything. Jimin folded his arms. I'm being realistic. You're being scared. The word landed harder than expected. Jimin's eyes snapped back to Jungkook. Excuse me. Jungkook didn't back down. You heard me. Jimin took a slow breath. I'm not scared of anything. Jungkook walked closer until they were standing face to face again. You're scared of feelings. That's ridiculous. Is it? Jimin's jaw tightened. You're pushing this conversation somewhere weird. Jungkook laughed quietly. It's already weird. Another silence stretched between them. The dorm felt strangely alive tonight. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside the window seemed louder than usual. Jimin rubbed his temple. You're making this dramatic. I'm being honest. About what? Jungkook hesitated. Then he asked something unexpected. Do you remember the night I cried in the practice room? Jimin frowned. You cried a lot in practice rooms. Jungkook rolled his eyes. Not like that. Jimin searched his memory. Then something clicked. You mean the evaluation night? Jungkook nodded slowly. Jimin remembered it clearly now. Jungkook had been younger, exhausted, frustrated with himself after messing up a routine. Everyone else had left eventually. Except Jimin. You stayed with me, Jungkook said. That's what friends do. You sat there for 2 hours, Jungkook replied, not saying anything, just staying. Jimin shrugged. You needed time. Jungkook looked at him with an intensity that made Jimin slightly uncomfortable. You were the only one who understood how my brain works. Jimin laughed softly. That's a dangerous claim. I'm serious. Jungkook stepped closer again, lowering his voice. You always knew when I was pretending to be okay. Jimin looked down at the counter. And you knew when I was. Jimin didn't answer. The quiet stretched again. Jungkook suddenly reached forward and tapped Jimin's chest lightly with 2 fingers. And right now, he said softly, this is doing that thing again. Jimin frowned. What thing? That thing where you lock everything inside and pretend it's fine. Jimin brushed Jungkook's hand away. You're reading too much into it. Am I? Yes. Jungkook studied him carefully. Then he said something that made the air shift again. You felt it earlier too. Jimin froze. What? When I wiped the flour off your face. Jimin's heartbeat stumbled slightly. That meant nothing. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Really? Yes. Then why did you stop breathing? Jimin stared at him. I did not stop breathing. You absolutely did. That's absurd. You froze like someone pressed pause on you. Jimin grabbed the dish towel from the counter and started wiping imaginary crumbs. You're inventing things again. Jungkook's voice dropped slightly. Hyung. Jimin kept wiping. You always do this when you're nervous. I'm cleaning. You're panicking. Jimin turned sharply. I am not panicking. Jungkook leaned closer, eyes searching Jimin's face. Then look at me. Jimin hesitated. That tiny hesitation said everything. Jungkook noticed immediately. See? Jimin finally looked up, irritation flashing in his expression. What do you want from me? Jungkook answered without hesitation. Honesty. You're getting honesty. No, Jungkook said quietly. I'm getting your defensive version of honesty. Jimin scoffed. There are versions now. Yes. What's the difference? Jungkook leaned forward slightly. The real one doesn't run away. The tension between them thickened again. Jimin suddenly felt the kitchen was too small. Why are you pushing this so hard? He asked. Jungkook shrugged lightly. Because you matter to me. The words came out so naturally that Jimin didn't react at first. Then he did. He blinked slowly. What? Jungkook looked almost confused by the reaction. You didn't know that. I assumed. But hearing it is different, right? Jimin didn't respond. Jungkook's expression softened slightly. You really didn't realize how important you are to me. Jimin looked down again, suddenly fascinated by the flower on the counter. You have a lot of important people in your life. Yeah. So why focus on me? Jungkook smiled faintly. Because you're different. Jimin exhaled slowly. Different how? Jungkook hesitated for a second. Then he said quietly, you're the one I look for first. Jimin's chest tightened. In a room, Jungkook continued, in a crowd backstage, I always check if you're there. Jimin tried to brush it off. That's habit. No, Jungkook said gently, it's not. Their eyes met again. Something electric flickered in the air between them. Jimin suddenly became very aware of how close they were standing. You're exaggerating, he muttered. Jungkook laughed softly. You really hate compliments, don't you? It's not a compliment. Then what is it? Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook stepped even closer. Close enough that Jimin could feel the warmth from his body in the cold kitchen air. You know what's funny, Jungkook said. What? You always tell people to face their fears. Jimin frowned. But when it's your turn, Jungkook continued, voice quieter now, you pretend there's nothing there. Jimin's throat felt dry. What exactly do you think is there? Jungkook held his gaze. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said softly, something you don't want to admit. Jimin forced a small laugh. You're turning a cooking lesson into a psychological thriller. Maybe it always was. What does that even mean? Jungkook leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Maybe the reason you stopped visiting this dorm. Jimin's pulse quickened. Is because it reminds you of things you don't want to think about. Jimin crossed his arms again. Like what? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the kitchen slowly. The old cabinets, the tiny stove, the worn floor tiles. Then he looked back at Jimin. Like how close we used to be. Jimin swallowed. We are still close. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No. His voice softened. Not like before. Jimin felt something heavy settle in his chest. That's normal, he said. People grow up. Or people get scared. Jimin sighed. You really love that word tonight. Because it fits. Jimin rubbed his face. You're exhausting. Jungkook grinned slightly. You're deflecting again. Jimin opened his mouth to argue. But Jungkook suddenly reached forward and grabbed his wrist. The sudden contact made Jimin freeze. Just answer one question, Jungkook said quietly. What? Jungkook's grip wasn't tight, but it was firm enough that Jimin couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. When I touched your face earlier. Jungkook's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Why did you look at me like that? Jimin's heart started beating faster. I didn't look at you anyway. You did. Jimin tried to pull his wrist back slightly. Jungkook didn't let go. Jungkook. Just answer. Jimin stared at him. The kitchen was silent, except for the faint wind outside. Finally, Jimin said quietly, because it surprised me. Jungkook's eyes searched his face. Only that. Jimin hesitated. Just for a second. Jungkook noticed immediately. That pause, he said softly. Jimin sighed. You're impossible. Maybe. Jungkook's voice became gentler. But you still didn't answer. Jimin looked directly at him now. Their faces were closer than they had been all night. Maybe, Jimin said slowly, it surprised me because you're not a kid anymore. Jungkook's expression shifted slightly. That's obvious. No, Jimin said quietly, not like that. The room felt warmer again. Jungkook studied him carefully. Then he asked something unexpected. Does that bother you? Jimin's voice came out softer than intended. Sometimes. Jungkook's grip loosened slightly. Why? Jimin looked down at their hands. Then back up. Because it means things change. Jungkook nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. Then, after a moment, he added quietly. Sometimes change isn't the scary part. Jimin frowned slightly. What is? Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. Then he said softly, realizing what was there the whole time. Realizing what was there the whole time. The words settled between them like something fragile that could shatter if either of them moved too quickly. Jimin slowly pulled his wrist free. He didn't step away, but the air shifted the moment Jungkook's fingers left his skin. You're being dramatic again, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook watched him for a long moment, searching his face like he was trying to see past the words. You always do that, Jungkook murmured. Do what? You downgrade everything that matters. Jimin folded his arms, leaning back against the counter. And you upgrade everything into a crisis. Jungkook let out a small breath of laughter, though his eyes remained serious. Maybe we balance each other out then. Jimin didn't answer. Outside the dorm, a car passed slowly on the wet street, its headlights gliding across the kitchen wall before fading into darkness. The silence between them stretched again. Jungkook finally spoke first. Why did you really come here tonight? Jimin blinked. You invited me. That's not what I asked. Jimin looked down at the flour scattered across the counter. You said you wanted to learn how to cook. Jungkook shook his head slowly. You knew that wasn't the real reason. Jimin sighed. You're impossible. And you're avoiding the question again. Jimin rubbed his face with one hand. You wanted to talk, he said, so we're talking. No, Jungkook said quietly, we're circling. Jimin looked at him again. Jungkook was standing only a few steps away now, his expression calmer but somehow more intense than before. You came tonight because something been bothering you, Jungkook said. That's an assumption. It's an observation. Based on what? Jungkook smiled faintly. You showed up here. Jimin scoffed softly. That's not proof of anything. You haven't been here in months. Jimin paused. Years, Jungkook corrected. The word landed heavier than expected. Jimin exhaled slowly. Fine, he admitted, maybe I was curious. About what? This place. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. That's the answer you're going with. It's the truth. No, Jungkook said quietly, it's a piece of it. Jimin turned toward the sink and started rinsing the plate, even though it was already clean. You really love interrogations tonight. Jungkook leaned his shoulder against the wall again. I'm just asking questions. You're dissecting my brain. You're the one who brought your brain into this kitchen. Jimin laughed despite himself. Unbelievable. The faucet ran for several seconds before Jimin finally turned it off. Jungkook watched him carefully. You've been restless lately, Jungkook said. Jimin glanced at him. What makes you think that? You called me at 2 in the morning last week. Jimin frowned slightly. I did not. You did. I texted you. At 2 in the morning. That's normal. You never text at 2 in the morning. Jimin leaned against the counter again. I couldn't sleep. Jungkook studied him. Why? Jimin shrugged. Just one of those nights. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. Then he said quietly, you sounded weird. Weird how? Like something was stuck in your head. Jimin looked down. You're reading too much into a text message. You said, Jungkook continued slowly, do you ever think about how things used to be? Jimin closed his eyes briefly. I was tired. That's not a tired question. Jimin exhaled. Why are we analyzing my insomnia? Because you don't ask questions like that unless something's wrong. Jimin remained silent. Jungkook pushed himself off the wall and walked closer again. What's going on with you? He asked softly. Jimin's first instinct was to brush it off. But something about the quiet sincerity in Jungkook's voice made the usual defenses feel heavier than usual. Nothing going on, he said, though the words sounded weaker than he wanted. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. You're a terrible liar. Good thing I'm not lying. Jungkook stepped closer until they were once again standing a few feet apart in the small kitchen. You've been distant, Jungkook said. We talked yesterday. That's not what I mean. Jimin rubbed his neck. You're exaggerating. Jungkook's voice softened. You disappeared after the concert. Jimin looked up sharply. That was months ago. You left early. I had things to do. You didn't even say goodbye. Jimin frowned. That's not true. You waved from across the room. That counts. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No, he said quietly, it doesn't. Jimin suddenly felt strangely defensive. It was a busy night. It was an important night. Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook continued, watching him carefully. You were quiet the whole evening, Jungkook said. Even Taehyung noticed. Jimin sighed. Can we not drag everyone else into this? I'm just saying you weren't yourself. I was fine. You looked uncomfortable. Jimin's jaw tightened. I wasn't uncomfortable. Jungkook hesitated. Then he said something that made Jimin's stomach twist. You saw me with someone. Jimin's eyes flickered. Jungkook noticed immediately. Yeah, Jungkook said softly, that. Jimin looked away. That wasn't a big deal. You left 10 minutes later. I was tired. You didn't answer my calls afterward. I was sleeping. You ignored 3 messages. Jimin exhaled slowly. Why does this matter? Jungkook studied him. Because you never told me why. Jimin shrugged. There's nothing to explain. Jungkook stepped even closer now. Who did you think she was? Jimin frowned. I didn't think anything. You looked like you were thinking a lot. Jimin let out a small laugh. You're imagining things again. Jungkook's gaze sharpened. Taehyung. What? Answer honestly. I am. No, Jungkook said quietly. You're deflecting again. Jimin's patience thinned. What do you want me to say? The truth. Jimin's voice sharpened slightly. You were talking to someone. Congratulations. That's not what you were reacting to. Jimin looked away. Jungkook took another step forward. The distance between them disappeared completely. Were you jealous? Jungkook asked. Jimin's head snapped back toward him. What? You heard me. That's ridiculous. Is it? Jimin stared at him like the question itself was absurd. Of course it is. Jungkook didn't move. You walked out the moment you saw us. I did not walk out. You absolutely did. I left politely. You vanished. Jimin crossed his arms again. You're turning a normal situation into drama. Jungkook's voice softened. You were upset. I was. You were. Jimin laughed. That's a wild conclusion. Jungkook studied his face closely. You didn't even say hello. I waved. You avoided eye contact. I was busy. You left early. I had work. Jungkook sighed. You're impossible. And you're overanalyzing everything again. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair. You know what's funny? What? You didn't even ask who she was. Jimin shrugged. Why would I? Jungkook's eyes narrowed slightly. Exactly. Jimin frowned. What does that mean? You didn't want to know. That's not true. Jungkook leaned slightly closer. You assumed. Jimin felt irritation creeping up his spine. Assumed what? That she meant something. Jimin scoffed. That's none of my business. Jungkook watched him carefully. You really believe that? Yes. Then why did you text me at 2 in the morning? Jimin's chest tightened again. That had nothing to do with that. Then what did it have to do with? Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook waited. The quiet stretched. Finally Jungkook spoke again, voice softer. Taehyung. Jimin looked at him reluctantly. Jungkook's expression had changed again. Less teasing now. More vulnerable. She's just someone I met through work, Jungkook said. Jimin blinked. I didn't ask. I know. Jimin shrugged. Good for you. Jungkook frowned. You're doing it again. Doing what? Pretending you don't care. Jimin's voice sharpened. Because I don't. Jungkook's eyes searched his face. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Jungkook said quietly, You're a terrible liar. Jimin laughed softly. You already said that. Yeah, Jungkook replied. His voice dropped slightly. But this time, you're proving it. Jimin opened his mouth to respond. But Jungkook suddenly stepped even closer. Now they were barely inches apart. You left because you were uncomfortable, Jungkook said. That's not true. You saw me laughing with someone else, and something about that bothered you. Jimin's heart started beating faster again. That's ridiculous. Jungkook's gaze softened slightly. You don't even realize it, do you? Realize what? Jungkook studied him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, You don't like the idea of me belonging somewhere else. Jimin froze. The words landed heavier than anything else Jungkook had said tonight. That's not what this is, Jimin said slowly. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. Then what is it? Jimin searched for an answer. But the kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of things he didn't want to think about. He began. Then stopped. Jungkook waited. Jimin exhaled slowly. I just didn't expect it. Expect what? Jimin hesitated again. Then said quietly, To see you like that. Jungkook frowned slightly. Like what? Jimin looked directly at him now. Like someone who doesn't need me anymore. The words came out softer than he intended. Jungkook's expression shifted instantly. Something almost shocked flickered across his face. Young, he said quietly. Jimin looked away again. You have your own life now, he continued. That's normal. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. You think talking to one person means I don't need you anymore? Jimin shrugged. It looked that way. Jungkook suddenly laughed. Not mockingly, but like he genuinely couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're unbelievable. What? You really think you're that replaceable? Jimin frowned. I didn't say replaceable. You implied it. Jimin stayed silent. Jungkook shook his head slowly. You have no idea how important you are to me. Jimin's voice came out quieter. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Jimin met his eyes again. The warmth in Jungkook's expression was impossible to ignore. And yet, Jimin said slowly, you looked happy with her. Jungkook blinked. Then laughed again, softer this time. I was telling her a story about you. Jimin froze. What? Jungkook smiled faintly. She asked why I keep talking about someone named Jimin. Jimin felt heat rise in his face. You're joking. I'm not. Jungkook leaned slightly closer. I was literally telling her how you once tried to cook rice without water. Jimin groaned. That happened one time. It was unforgettable. Jimin shook his head, embarrassed. You told a stranger that story. Of course. Why? Jungkook looked at him like the answer was obvious. Because you're my favorite person to talk about. The words hung in the air. Warm. Unexpected. Jimin didn't know how to respond. Jungkook watched his reaction carefully. Then said quietly, So no, Young. His voice softened even more. You didn't see me with someone who replaced you. Jimin looked at him again. Jungkook's expression was calm now. Honest. You saw someone who was talking about you. The kitchen fell silent again. And this time, Jimin didn't have a defense ready. Jimin didn't answer immediately. The kitchen felt strangely quiet after Jungkook's words, like the air itself had paused to see what he would say next. You talk about me to strangers, Jimin finally asked, his voice softer than he expected. Jungkook shrugged slightly, though the corner of his mouth curved with a faint smile. Not strangers, he said, people I meet. That doesn't make it better. Jungkook laughed quietly. You're embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. You are. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding Jungkook's eyes for a second. It's just weird. What part? That you're telling people stories about me like I'm some kind of character. Jungkook tilted his head. You are a character. Thanks. A very dramatic one. Jimin scoffed softly. You're the one who just turned pancakes into a psychological interrogation. Jungkook grinned. See, dramatic. For a moment, the tension loosened slightly. But it didn't disappear. Something heavier still lingered beneath the surface. Jungkook leaned back against the counter again, folding his arms. You know, he said, you still didn't answer my question. Jimin sighed. Which one? Why it bothered you? It didn't bother me. Jungkook stared at him. Hyung. What? You literally walked out of the room. I had work. You had an excuse. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're relentless. You're stubborn. That's rich coming from you. Jungkook's smile faded slightly. Just answer honestly once. Jimin looked at him again. The sincerity in Jungkook's expression made it harder to brush things off like usual. I already told you, Jimin said quietly, I didn't expect it. Expect what? To see you like that. Jungkook frowned slightly. Talking to someone. No, Jimin said slowly. Then what? Jimin hesitated again. Jungkook noticed the hesitation immediately. You do this every time, Jungkook said softly. Do what? You get right up to the point, and then you stop. Jimin's jaw tightened. Maybe the point isn't that important. Jungkook pushed himself off the counter. Maybe it is. He walked closer again, stopping only a step away. Jimin could feel the faint warmth radiating from him. You saw me laughing with her, Jungkook continued quietly. And you looked like someone punched you in the stomach. Jimin frowned. That's an exaggeration. You nearly dropped your drink. I was tired. You weren't tired. Jimin let out a breath of frustration. Why are you so obsessed with this moment? Jungkook answered immediately. Because it's the first time I saw you react like that. React like what? Like you were losing something. The words made Jimin's chest tighten unexpectedly. That's not what happened. Jungkook studied him carefully. Then tell me what happened. Jimin looked down at the floor tiles. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Finally, he muttered quietly, it just caught me off guard. How? Jimin shrugged. You looked different. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Different how? Jimin searched for words. You looked like someone else. Jungkook blinked. What does that mean? Jimin sighed. You were laughing with someone I'd never seen before, telling stories, looking relaxed, like you had this whole other life I wasn't part of. Jungkook stared at him. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked quietly, and that bothered you? Jimin hesitated. Maybe. Jungkook's voice softened. Why? Jimin finally looked up again. Because for a second it felt like I was outside of it. Outside of what? Your world. Jungkook's eyebrows pulled together. You were never outside of my world. It didn't feel that way. Jungkook took another step closer. Now there was barely any space between them. Young, he said quietly, you're literally the center of half my stories. Jimin laughed softly, though it sounded slightly strained. That's not the same thing. Why not? Because stories aren't real life. Jungkook looked at him carefully. You really think that? Jimin shrugged. They're memories. They're important memories. Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook leaned slightly closer. You know what I think? What? I think you saw me with someone else and suddenly realized something you weren't ready to deal with. Jimin's heartbeat stumbled. That's a bold assumption. Jungkook smiled faintly. You've said that twice tonight. Because you keep making bold assumptions. Jungkook tilted his head. Then prove me wrong. Jimin folded his arms again. You're impossible. Maybe. Jungkook's voice dropped slightly. But you still haven't explained why it bothered you. Jimin looked away again. For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the faint whistle of wind slipping through the window frame. Then Jungkook spoke again. Did you think I was dating her? Jimin shrugged. I didn't think about it. That's not true. You're assuming again. Jungkook studied his face carefully. You did. Jimin sighed. Fine, maybe I did. And nothing. And nothing, Jungkook repeated. Jimin shrugged again. You're allowed to date people. Of course I am. So there's nothing to talk about. Jungkook's eyes narrowed slightly. You say that like it's obvious. Because it is. Jungkook leaned even closer. But you didn't look like someone who thought it was obvious. Jimin's voice sharpened slightly. Maybe I was surprised. Why? Jimin hesitated. Jungkook waited. Finally, Jimin said quietly, because you never told me. Jungkook blinked. Told you what? If you were seeing someone. Jungkook looked confused. Why would I need to tell you that? The question came out so casually that it made Jimin flinch slightly. I didn't say you needed to. But you expected me to. Jimin stayed silent. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly as something clicked. Those. Jimin frowned. What? Jungkook stared at him like he had just discovered a secret hidden in plain sight. Young. What? You did expect me to tell you. Jimin looked uncomfortable now. That's not what I meant. Jungkook laughed quietly. That's exactly what you meant. Jimin shook his head. You're twisting my words. No, Jungkook said softly, I'm finally understanding them. Jimin felt heat rising in his face again. Stop looking at me like that. Like what? Like you solved a puzzle. Jungkook's smile returned slightly. Maybe I did. Jimin groaned softly. You're insufferable. Jungkook stepped even closer. Now their shoulders were nearly touching. You thought I was dating someone, Jungkook said. Jimin didn't answer. And that bothered you. Jimin remained silent. Jungkook lowered his voice. More than you want to admit. Jimin finally looked directly at him again. You're enjoying this way too much. I'm enjoying the honesty. This isn't honesty, it's interrogation. Same thing sometimes. Jimin rubbed his face again. You're exhausting. And yet you came here. Jimin paused. Jungkook noticed. You could have ignored my invitation, Jungkook continued quietly, but you didn't. Jimin sighed. Maybe I wanted pancakes. Jungkook laughed. You hate pancakes. That's not true. You literally complained about them last year. Jimin groaned. You remember everything. Especially things about you. The warmth in Jungkook's voice made Jimin look up again. Their eyes met. And for a second, the teasing atmosphere shifted into something deeper again. Jungkook spoke more quietly now. You know what I think really happened that night? Jimin didn't answer. I think you saw me with someone else, and it forced you to ask yourself a question you've been avoiding. Jimin swallowed. What question? Jungkook held his gaze. Why it mattered. Jimin opened his mouth to respond. But nothing came out. Jungkook watched the hesitation carefully. There it is again, he said softly. What? That moment where you almost say something real. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're reading too much into silence. Silence says a lot. Jimin looked away. The kitchen suddenly felt warmer again. Jungkook's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Hi Young. Jimin reluctantly looked back at him. Tell me something honestly. What? Jungkook held his gaze steadily. When you thought I might be dating someone. He paused for just a moment. Why did that feel wrong to you? Jimin's heart started beating faster again. I didn't say it felt wrong. But it did. Jimin didn't respond. Jungkook studied his face carefully. Then he said quietly, You looked jealous. Jimin laughed sharply. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Jungkook leaned closer. Then look me in the eyes and say it. Jimin frowned. Say what? That you didn't care. Jimin met his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Jimin said quietly, I didn't care. Jungkook watched him carefully. A small smile slowly appeared on his face. You hesitated. Jimin groaned. You're unbelievable. Jungkook's voice softened again. You didn't say it confidently. That's because this conversation is ridiculous. Jungkook leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. No, he said gently. It's ridiculous because you're trying so hard not to admit something. Jimin's pulse quickened again. And what exactly do you think I'm hiding? He asked. Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. Then he said softly, That may be the reason it bothered you. He paused just long enough to make the air feel heavy. Is because the idea of me being with someone else feels wrong in a way you can't explain. Jimin stared at him. The kitchen was silent again. And for the first time that night, Jimin didn't deny it immediately. Jimin didn't answer. The silence that followed Jungkook's words felt heavier than anything they had said all night. The faint wind still moved through the cracked window, brushing the curtains slightly, but neither of them noticed it anymore. Jungkook was watching him carefully. Waiting. Jimin finally looked away first. You're making a lot of assumptions, he said quietly. Jungkook didn't move. Am I? Yes. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. Then why didn't you deny it? Jimin frowned. I did. No, Jungkook said softly, you avoided it. Jimin let out a slow breath. You're impossible tonight. And you're cornered, Jungkook replied calmly. Jimin laughed under his breath. Cornered, this is a kitchen, not a courtroom. Jungkook took one slow step closer. But you look like someone who just got caught lying. Jimin's jaw tightened. I'm not lying. Then say it clearly. Jimin folded his arms again. I didn't care. Jungkook stared at him. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he smiled slightly. That sounded rehearsed. Jimin scoffed. You're unbelievable. And you're nervous. I'm not nervous. You're repeating yourself again. Jimin rubbed his forehead. This conversation is going in circles. Jungkook leaned against the counter beside him. Because you keep avoiding the center. And what exactly is the center? Jungkook looked directly at him. You. Jimin raised an eyebrow. That's dramatic. No, Jungkook said quietly, it's honest. The kitchen felt warmer again. Jimin became suddenly aware of how close Jungkook was standing. Their shoulders nearly touched. You said something earlier, Jungkook continued. Jimin glanced at him. What? You said it felt like you were outside my world. Jimin sighed softly. I didn't mean it like that. But you did feel it. Jimin hesitated. For a second. Jungkook nodded slowly. And that second bothered you. Jimin didn't respond. Jungkook leaned his elbows on the counter, looking down for a moment before speaking again. You know something funny. Jimin looked at him cautiously. What? I felt that way before too. Jimin blinked. What do you mean? Jungkook's voice softened. Like I was outside your world. Jimin frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does. Jungkook turned slightly toward him. There were times when you got quiet, distant, like you were thinking about things you never told anyone. Jimin shrugged. That's normal. But it made me wonder if I still mattered to you the same way. Jimin looked at him again. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Jungkook's expression didn't change. You stopped visiting this dorm. We all moved out. You stopped calling late at night. People get busy. You stopped telling me things. Jimin paused. That's not true. Jungkook gave him a small look. It is. Jimin sighed. You're remembering it wrong. Am I? Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook watched him carefully. Then he said quietly, Hyung, do you remember the night before we moved out? Jimin's eyes flickered. The memory surfaced immediately. The dorm had been half empty, boxes stacked near the hallway, everyone exhausted from packing and rehearsals. They had stayed up late in the kitchen that night too. You couldn't sleep, Jungkook continued. Jimin nodded slightly. You kept packing around the living room. Jimin remembered that. Then you suddenly asked me something weird. Jimin frowned. What? Jungkook smiled faintly. You asked me what I thought the future would look like. Jimin let out a small breath. I remember. You looked scared. I wasn't scared. You were. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck again. I was just tired. Jungkook shook his head slightly. You said something else too. Jimin looked at him. What? Jungkook held his gaze. You said you were worried things would change too much. Jimin didn't respond. You said you didn't want to lose what we had. The words echoed quietly in the kitchen. Jimin looked down at the counter. That was years ago. Yeah. Jungkook's voice softened. But you still think about it. Jimin didn't deny it. Jungkook studied him for a moment before asking something unexpected. Did you think I'd drift away from you? Jimin hesitated. Maybe. Jungkook looked surprised. Why? Jimin laughed quietly, though it sounded tired. Because that's what happens when people grow up. Jungkook shook his head. Not always. Usually. Not with us. Jimin finally looked back at him. You can't promise that. Jungkook shrugged slightly. I'm not promising anything. Then what are you saying? Jungkook leaned closer. I'm saying I never wanted to lose you. The sincerity in his voice made Jimin's chest tighten again. You didn't lose me, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook smiled faintly. Sometimes it felt like I was. Jimin frowned. That's not fair. Maybe. Jungkook's gaze softened. But feelings aren't always fair. The kitchen fell silent again. Jimin leaned back against the counter, staring at the ceiling for a moment. You're really determined to turn tonight into a therapy session, he muttered. Jungkook laughed softly. You're the one who started the emotional texts. Jimin groaned. Don't remind me. Jungkook smiled. You said, do you ever think about how things used to be? I regret sending that. I'm glad you did. Jimin looked at him. Why? Jungkook's voice dropped slightly. Because it means you were thinking about me too. Jimin blinked. That's not what that meant. Sure. Jimin sighed. You're twisting everything again. Jungkook stepped closer again. Now the space between them felt almost non-existent. Then explain it. Jimin hesitated. For a moment, he considered lying again. But something about the way Jungkook was looking at him made it harder than usual. I was thinking about this place, Jimin admitted quietly. Jungkook glanced around the kitchen. The dorm. Yeah. And Jimin exhaled slowly. It made me realize how much things have changed. Jungkook nodded. They have. Jimin's voice softened. But some things haven't. Jungkook's eyes searched his face. Like what? Jimin hesitated again. Then he said quietly, like you. Jungkook looked slightly surprised. What about me? Jimin shrugged. You still talk too much. Jungkook laughed. That's your observation. And you still push people when you want answers. Jungkook grinned. Also true. Jimin looked at him again. And you still look at me like you're trying to read my mind. Jungkook tilted his head. Maybe I am. Jimin sighed. You're terrible at boundaries. And you're terrible at honesty. Jimin smiled faintly. Fair. The tension softened slightly again. But it didn't disappear completely. Jungkook leaned against the counter beside him, their shoulders finally touching lightly. Neither of them moved away. You know something, Jungkook said quietly. What? You never answered my question. Jimin closed his eyes briefly. Which one this time? The important one. Jimin looked at him again. About why it bothered you. Jimin hesitated. Jungkook waited patiently. Finally, Jimin said softly. It wasn't jealousy. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. But Jimin looked away. It just felt strange. Strange how? Jimin searched for the right words. Like something was shifting. Jungkook watched him carefully. And that scared you? Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook nodded slowly. Yeah, he said quietly, that makes sense. Jimin glanced at him. You're not going to tease me about that. Jungkook shook his head. No. Why not? Jungkook looked at him with an expression that was unexpectedly gentle. Because I felt the same thing. Jimin blinked. What? Jungkook hesitated for a second before speaking. When you started pulling away, I thought maybe you didn't need me anymore. Jimin frowned. That's ridiculous. You keep saying that. Because it is. Jungkook shrugged. Feelings don't listen to logic. Jimin sighed. You're annoyingly wise tonight. Jungkook grinned. I've been holding it in. Jimin laughed quietly. The warmth between them returned for a moment. But then Jungkook's expression shifted again. More serious. There's something else I should tell you, he said. Jimin looked at him. What? Jungkook hesitated slightly. Then he said quietly, the girl you saw that night. Jimin felt his stomach tighten again. Oh, yes. Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. She asked me if I liked someone. Jimin froze. And he asked slowly. Jungkook held his gaze. And I said yes. The kitchen suddenly felt very still. Jimin's heart started beating faster again. You did. Jungkook nodded once. Jimin forced a neutral expression. That's good. Jungkook studied him carefully. You didn't ask who. Jimin shrugged. That's your business. Jungkook leaned slightly closer. But you want to know. Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook's voice softened. You really want to know. Jimin's pulse quickened again. Maybe. Jungkook watched him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, the reason I told her yes. He paused just long enough to make the air feel electric. Is because I realized something recently. Jimin swallowed. What? Jungkook held his gaze steadily. That the person I like. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Has been standing right in front of me for years. The words hung in the kitchen like a spark waiting to catch fire. Jimin didn't move. For several seconds, he simply stared at Jungkook, as if the sentence had arrived in a language he understood but couldn't process. The person I like has been standing right in front of me for years. Jimin blinked slowly. You're joking, he said quietly. Jungkook didn't laugh. The seriousness in his eyes made the air feel heavier. I'm not. Jimin let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh. That's not funny. I'm not trying to be funny. Jimin shook his head once, stepping back slightly. The movement created a small gap between them, but it didn't make the tension disappear. You're messing with me, Jimin said. Jungkook frowned slightly. Why would I mess with you about that? Jimin rubbed his forehead like he was trying to reset his brain. Because you say dramatic things when you're emotional. I'm always emotional. Exactly. Jungkook studied him carefully. You think I'm exaggerating? Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook took a slow step forward. You really think I would say something like that as a joke? Jimin's voice came out quieter. I think you're confused. Jungkook laughed softly, though it carried frustration. Confused? Yes. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair. Hyung, I've had years to think about this. That doesn't mean you're right. Right about what? Jimin hesitated. Then said quietly, about what you're feeling. Jungkook stared at him. You're telling me I don't understand my own feelings. I'm saying you might be interpreting them wrong. Jungkook let out a breath of disbelief. That's convenient. Jimin crossed his arms again. It's realistic. Jungkook stepped closer again, frustration starting to creep into his voice. Hyung. What? You're doing it again. Doing what? Trying to shrink something big into something safe. Jimin shook his head. You're making it bigger than it is. Jungkook's expression sharpened. Did you really hear what I said? Yes. And your response is that I'm confused. Jimin looked away briefly. It's complicated. No, Jungkook said firmly. It's actually very simple. Jimin frowned. Oh, really? Yes. Jungkook took another step closer. Now they were only inches apart again. I like you. The words came out clear and steady. Jimin's chest tightened. You're saying that like it's easy, he muttered. It is. No, Jimin said quietly, it is. Jungkook studied his face carefully. You're scared. Jimin immediately shook his head. I'm not scared. You are. I'm not. You are, Jungkook repeated calmly. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. This is exactly what I was worried about. Jungkook frowned. What does that mean? Jimin exhaled slowly. It means things get messy when people cross lines. Jungkook's eyes narrowed slightly. What lines? You know what lines. Say it. Jimin looked directly at him. We're not just two random people. Jungkook shrugged. I know that. We have history. I know that too. We have responsibilities. Jungkook tilted his head. What responsibilities stop someone from liking another person? Jimin's voice grew sharper. You know exactly what I mean. Actually, Jungkook said quietly, I don't. Jimin stared at him. You're being naive. Jungkook laughed softly. You think I'm naive? Yes. Jungkook shook his head slowly. I've thought about this more than you realize. Jimin's voice softened slightly. That doesn't make it easier. Jungkook stepped closer again. What exactly are you afraid of? I told you already. No, Jungkook said. You gave me a vague answer. Jimin sighed. Things change when feelings get involved. Jungkook nodded. They do. And sometimes they break. Jungkook didn't deny that. But sometimes they grow stronger. Jimin looked unconvinced. You're gambling with something important. Jungkook's voice dropped slightly. I'm being honest with someone important. The sincerity in the sentence made Jimin look away again. Jungkook watched him carefully. Tell me something honestly, he said. Jimin sighed. You're not going to stop asking questions, are you? No. Fine, Jimin muttered. Ask. Jungkook held his gaze. When I said I like you, what did you feel? Jimin froze. The directness of the question made his chest tighten again. I didn't feel anything, he said. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Jimin frowned. It's the truth. Jungkook studied his face. You didn't even think for a second. There's nothing to think about. Jungkook leaned closer. Really? Yes. Jungkook's voice softened. Then why are you breathing like that? Jimin blinked. What? You're breathing. Jimin suddenly became aware that his chest was rising slightly faster than normal. That means nothing. Jungkook smiled faintly. It means you're not as calm as you're pretending. Jimin looked irritated. You're analyzing everything again. Because you're hiding everything again. Jimin exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. Jungkook shook his head. No. What do you want from me? Jungkook answered without hesitation. Honesty. Jimin laughed quietly. You're obsessed with that word. Because it matters. Jimin looked at him again. And if I'm honest. Jungkook waited. What then? Jungkook's voice softened. Then at least we stop pretending. Jimin hesitated. The kitchen felt too warm now. Too quiet. You're asking me to risk something important, he said quietly. Jungkook's eyes softened. I already did. Jimin frowned. What? I told you how I feel. That's different. How? You're younger. Jungkook laughed softly. That's your argument. It's one of them. Jungkook shook his head. Age has nothing to do with feelings. Sometimes it does. No, Jungkook said quietly, fear does. Jimin's jaw tightened again. You think this is fear? Yes. Jimin scoffed. You're very confident tonight. I'm tired of pretending. Jimin studied him carefully. Pretending what? That this tension between us hasn't existed for years. Jimin froze slightly. That's not true. Jungkook tilted his head. Really? Yes. Jungkook smiled faintly. Then explain why everyone else noticed it. Jimin frowned. What are you talking about? Jungkook hesitated for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. Taehyung asked me once if something was going on between us. Jimin's eyes widened. He what? Jungkook nodded. During a tour. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. And what did you say? Jungkook shrugged slightly. I told him he was imagining things. Jimin crossed his arms again. Good. Jungkook's voice softened. But he was. Jimin looked away. That's ridiculous. Jungkook stepped closer again. You really think no one noticed how close we were? That's normal. Maybe, Jungkook said quietly. But the way you looked at me sometimes wasn't normal. Jimin's heart skipped. You're imagining things again. Jungkook leaned closer. No, he whispered. I'm remembering. Jimin's voice came out tense. You're rewriting memories. Jungkook shook his head slowly. You're the one trying to erase them. The tension between them felt almost electric now. Neither of them stepped back. Neither of them looked away. Jungkook spoke again, softer now. You know what the hardest part was? Jimin frowned. What? Not knowing if you ever felt it too. Jimin didn't respond. Jungkook studied his face carefully. You're quiet again. Jimin looked down. That doesn't mean anything. Jungkook's voice dropped slightly. Sometimes it means everything. Jimin exhaled slowly. This is a mistake. Jungkook frowned. What is? This conversation. Why? Because it changes things. Jungkook nodded. Yes. And you're okay with that? Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. Yes. Jimin searched his face for doubt. But there wasn't any. Why? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook's expression softened. Because pretending nothing is there hurts more. The honesty in his voice made Jimin's chest tighten again. Jungkook continued softly. And because I've spent too many years wondering what would happen if I told you. Jimin's voice came out barely above a whisper. And now you know. Jungkook nodded. Yeah. Jimin swallowed. And if the answer isn't what you want? Jungkook didn't hesitate. Then at least I'll know. The kitchen fell silent again. Jimin stared at him for several seconds. Then he said quietly, You're braver than I thought. Jungkook smiled faintly. No, he said softly. I've just been honest longer than you have. The kitchen felt smaller than ever. Jimin could hear the faint hum of the old refrigerator, the whisper of wind through the window, and the quiet rhythm of Jungkook's breathing only inches away from him. You've just been honest longer than I have. The sentence echoed in Jimin's head. He stared at Jungkook for several seconds, his mind trying to process everything that had just been said. You're assuming I'm not honest, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook shook his head. No, he replied calmly, I'm saying you're afraid to be. Jimin let out a slow breath. You think you understand me better than I understand myself. Jungkook shrugged slightly. Sometimes. Jimin almost laughed. That's incredibly arrogant. Maybe, Jungkook said, but I've been watching you for years. Jimin crossed his arms. That's not comforting. Jungkook smiled faintly. It's the truth. Jimin looked away toward the window. The city lights outside flickered faintly in the distance, reflecting on the glass like scattered memories. This is exactly why I didn't want this conversation, Jimin murmured. Jungkook tilted his head. Why? Because now everything feels unstable. Jungkook leaned against the counter beside him. Things were already unstable. Jimin frowned. They were. They were, Jungkook said quietly. You just ignored it. Jimin rubbed his temple. You're turning years of friendship into something complicated. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No, he said, I'm admitting it was always complicated. Jimin turned back to him. You're rewriting history. Jungkook's expression softened slightly. Maybe you're the one who simplified it. Jimin stared at him. That's convenient. Jungkook shrugged. Or honest. Jimin let out a quiet sigh. You know what the problem is. What? You're looking at this emotionally. And you're looking at it defensively. Jimin didn't deny that. Jungkook studied his face carefully. Tell me something, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin glanced at him. What? If I hadn't said anything tonight, would you have? Jimin froze. The question landed deeper than he expected. No, he admitted after a moment. Jungkook nodded slowly. Exactly. Jimin frowned. That doesn't mean anything. It means you were planning to keep pretending. Jimin shook his head. It means I wasn't planning to complicate things. Jungkook leaned closer again. You mean you weren't planning to admit things? Jimin's voice tightened. You're still assuming there's something to admit. Jungkook looked at him steadily. There is. Jimin scoffed. You're incredibly confident about that. Jungkook's voice softened. Because I know you. Jimin turned toward the sink, grabbing the dish towel again, even though there was nothing left to clean. You think you know everything. I know when you're lying. I'm not lying. You are. Jimin sighed. This is pointless. Jungkook pushed himself off the counter and walked closer again. Then answer something honestly. Jimin didn't turn around. What? Look at me. Jimin hesitated. Why? Because I want to see your face when you answer. Jimin slowly turned. Their eyes met again. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. Jungkook spoke softly. If I started dating someone tomorrow. Jimin felt his chest tighten immediately. Would it bother you? Jimin forced a calm expression. No. Jungkook watched him carefully. That answer was too fast. It's the truth. Jungkook took another step closer. Then why did your shoulders tense? Jimin frowned. You're imagining things. You crossed your arms tighter. That means nothing. Jungkook's voice lowered. It means you're uncomfortable. Jimin let out a small laugh. You should have been a detective. Maybe. Jungkook leaned slightly closer. But I already solved the case. Jimin rolled his eyes. Oh really? Yes. Jungkook held his gaze. You care more than you want to admit. Jimin shook his head. That's your fantasy. No, Jungkook said quietly, it's your fear. Jimin's jaw tightened. Stop psychoanalyzing me. Then stop lying to yourself. The words hung sharply in the air. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jimin's voice came out lower now. You're pushing too hard. Jungkook didn't step back. I've waited too long. Jimin frowned. For what? For you to stop hiding. Jimin shook his head slowly. You think this is about courage? Jungkook tilted his head. Isn't it? No. Jimin's voice softened slightly. It's about consequences. Jungkook watched him carefully. What consequences? Jimin hesitated. Then said quietly, if things go wrong, we lose something important. Jungkook's expression softened. Maybe. Jimin continued. We lose the way things are. Jungkook shook his head. The way things are already hurts. Jimin looked at him again. Why? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Then he said quietly, because every time you pull away, I wonder if I imagined everything. Jimin blinked. What do you mean? Jungkook laughed softly, though it carried a trace of sadness. There were moments, small ones. Jimin frowned. Like what? Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. The way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't paying attention. Jimin's heartbeat stumbled. That's not real. It is. You're misremembering. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No. Jimin's voice came out quieter. You're reading things that weren't there. Jungkook leaned closer. They were there. Jimin looked away again. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Jungkook's voice softened. Why is it so hard for you to admit you might feel something too? Jimin exhaled slowly. Because feelings don't exist in a vacuum. Jungkook frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means there are expectations. From who? Everyone. Jungkook shrugged. Everyone isn't standing in this kitchen right now. Jimin laughed quietly. You're very brave when it's just the two of us. Jungkook's gaze sharpened. I'd say the same thing anywhere. Jimin raised an eyebrow. You really believe that? Yes. Jimin studied him carefully. You'd risk everything for this. Jungkook didn't hesitate. Yes. Jimin shook his head slowly. You're reckless. Jungkook smiled faintly. Maybe. Then he added quietly. Or maybe I just know what matters to me. The sincerity in his voice made Jimin's chest tighten again. The room fell silent. Jungkook stepped even closer. Now their shoulders touched again. Tell me something honestly, Jungkook said. Jimin sighed. You love that phrase. Because it works. Jimin looked at him. What? Jungkook's voice dropped almost to a whisper. When I said I like you, what scared you more? Jimin frowned. What do you mean? Jungkook held his gaze steadily. The idea that I feel that way. He paused. or the possibility that you might feel it too. Jimin's breath caught slightly. He didn't answer. Jungkook watched the silence carefully. Then he smiled faintly. There it is again. Jimin frowned. What? That moment. What moment? The one where you don't say no. Jimin looked away again. You're impossible. Jungkook leaned closer, his voice soft but steady. No. He paused for just a moment. You're just not ready to admit the truth yet. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The kitchen seemed suspended in time, the dim light buzzing overhead, the faint smell of flour and burnt butter still clinging to the air like the echo of an earlier, simpler moment. You're just not ready to admit the truth yet. Jungkook's voice was calm when he said it, not accusing, not angry, just certain. Jimin stared at him. Something inside his chest felt like it was slowly tightening, like a knot he had ignored for too many years was finally pulling itself closed. You talk like everything is obvious, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook didn't step back. Some things are. Jimin let out a breath that trembled more than he wanted. You think feelings are simple. No, Jungkook replied softly. I think hiding them is complicated. Jimin looked down at the counter. Flour dust was still scattered there, pale against the dark surface. A strange memory flickered in his mind, the moment earlier when Jungkook had laughed and brushed flour onto his cheek, the way they had both fallen silent afterward, the warmth of it. The warmth that had scared him. You're asking me to cross a line, Jimin murmured. Jungkook shook his head. I'm asking you to stop pretending the line isn't already blurred. Jimin closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them again, Jungkook was still there, still watching him with that same steady patience. You've been thinking about this for years, Jimin said quietly. Yes. And you're sure? Yes. Jimin studied his face carefully. There was no hesitation there. No uncertainty. Just honesty. That frightened Jimin more than anything. Why me? He asked suddenly. Jungkook blinked. What? Out of everyone in the world, Jimin said softly, why me? Jungkook looked almost surprised by the question. Then he laughed quietly. Hyung, that's the easiest question you've asked tonight. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Oh really? Jungkook nodded. Yes. He leaned against the counter, close enough that their shoulders brushed again. Because you're the first person who ever made me feel safe. Jimin didn't expect that answer. Jungkook continued, voice calm but sincere. You stayed with me when I was struggling. You listened when I didn't know how to explain things. You pushed me when I needed it and protected me when I didn't even realize I needed it. Jimin looked down again. That's what friends do. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No, he said quietly. That's what you did. Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook's voice softened. And somewhere along the way, that feeling changed. The kitchen fell quiet again. Jimin could feel the weight of those words settling around him. Did you ever try to stop it? Jimin asked. Jungkook laughed softly. Of course. And Jungkook shrugged. It didn't work. Jimin exhaled slowly. You make it sound so easy. It was. Jimin looked at him again. Then why are you so calm now? Jungkook held his gaze. Because I finally said it. The honesty in his voice made Jimin's chest tighten again. You're brave, Jimin murmured. Jungkook smiled faintly. Maybe. Then he added quietly. Or maybe I was just tired of lying to myself. Jimin let those words sit in the air. Then he said something that surprised even himself. I was jealous. Jungkook blinked. What? Jimin looked away immediately, rubbing the back of his neck. That night, he said quietly, when I saw you with her. Jungkook didn't speak. I told you it didn't bother me, Jimin continued. Then he sighed. That wasn't true. Jungkook stared at him. You were jealous. Jimin nodded once. Yeah. Jungkook looked almost stunned. Why? Jimin laughed softly, a little embarrassed. I think you already know. Jungkook didn't respond. Jimin finally looked at him again. Because the idea of you belonging to someone else felt wrong. The words hung in the kitchen, warm and terrifying at the same time. Jungkook's eyes softened. You're serious? Jimin nodded slowly. But that doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes simple. Jungkook took a small step closer. I know. Jimin looked at him carefully. You're not going to push. Jungkook shook his head. No. Why not? Jungkook smiled gently. Because this part has to be your choice. The sincerity in that answer made something inside Jimin shift. For years he had been afraid that acknowledging certain feelings would destroy the fragile balance between them. But standing here now, he realized something unexpected. The balance had already changed. Not tonight. Not when Jungkook confessed. It had changed years ago, slowly, quietly, in all those small moments they had shared without understanding what they meant. Jimin let out a slow breath. You're really patient tonight, he said. Jungkook laughed softly. I've had a lot of practice. Jimin looked down at the floor for a moment. Then back up again. When did you realize? He asked. Jungkook thought for a second. Honestly, yes. Probably the night we moved out of this dorm. Jimin blinked. Really? Jungkook nodded. You asked me about the future. Jimin remembered. You looked scared, Jungkook continued. And I realized something. What? That wherever my future went, I wanted you in it. The quiet in the kitchen felt softer now. Not tense. Just full. Jimin leaned back against the counter. You know this complicates everything, he said. Jungkook nodded. Yeah. And you're okay with that? Jungkook smiled. I told you already. Jimin stuttered him. You're stubborn. You like that about me? Jimin snorted quietly. Sometimes. Jungkook looked at him with that same steady warmth. So, he said gently. So, what happens now? Jimin didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the small kitchen, the crooked cabinets, the flickering light, the window where cold air still drifted in. This place held so many memories. Late nights, arguments, laughter, and now this. Finally, Jimin looked back at Jungkook. What happens now, he said slowly, is that we stop pretending. Jungkook's expression softened. That sounds good to me. Jimin hesitated. Then he reached for the flower bag on the counter. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. What are you doing? Jimin dipped his fingers into the flower and lightly brushed a streak across Jungkook's cheek. Jungkook froze. Hi Jung. Jimin smiled faintly. You started it. For a moment they both stood there again, just like earlier. Flower dust drifting in the warm kitchen light. But this time, the silence between them felt different. Not uncertain, just full of possibilities. Jungkook laughed softly and wiped the flower from his cheek. You know, he said. What? You never said the words. Jimin raised an eyebrow. What words? Jungkook looked at him with quiet amusement. The honest ones. Jimin held his gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled, and for the first time that night, he didn't look afraid anymore. Maybe, Jimin said softly, some truths are warmer when you discover them slowly.